Well, hello, the internet. Welcome to another edition of The Breakfast Club with Gothatfunk. I'd like to thank you for joining me. Considering the terrorism in the USA this week, I think it would be remiss of me to make a Breakfast Club video on any other topic. And I might have made a video about this earlier on, except for the fact that I was sort of waiting on purpose to allow facts to develop because there was so much speculation about false flags and everything like that. Whether or not, the identity of the bomber wasn't known and so forth. And it's still not known, in quotation marks, known. They have apprehended a suspect, which I think they probably wouldn't do unless they were pretty sure. Having said that, it remains to be seen. But at the end of the day, they have someone who they think is the MAGABomber. I'm not going to dignify the man by saying his name on the internet. And anybody else out there who decides to make a video about the MAGABomber, I hope that you won't mention the guy's name. I think infamy is part of the reason things like school shootings and other such mass acts of violence are committed in the first place. I think at least a part of the reason these things keep happening is because the perpetrators in question want that little bit of infamy. Infamy is as good as fame to them. So anyway, I'm not going to dignify him by saying his name on the internet. The MAGABomber had targeted, nearly a dozen different people, or sent a dozen different bombs to different people. He sent 2 to Joe Biden at different addresses, of course. 2 to California Congresswoman Maxine Waters at different addresses. He sent 1 to Bill and Hillary Clinton. He sent 1 to Barack and Michelle Obama. He sent 1 to John Brennan, who used to be the director of the CIA back in the day. And you might think, well, what's the big deal about John Brennan? He's not even a lefty, right? Well, that's true. However, all of the targets on the list, and there's more, you probably know them by now because they've been repeated on the news ad infinitum. But yeah, the targets are, for the most part, people on the political left-hand side of the spectrum, as well as John Brennan and CNN. And all of these targets have been singled out for specific and repeated abuse and criticism by President of the United States, Donald Trump. Considering how specific these targets were, let me rephrase that. Considering the correlation that all of the people in question, or in the case of CNN, news outlets in question, all of them have been specifically singled out by Donald Trump in speeches and in goodness knows how many tweets over the past 2 years for abuse. And I don't think it's too much of a stretch to consider the possibility that the President of the United States might be guilty of incitement. Now, that might sound like a reactionary sort of thing to say. And I'm not saying it's definitely the case, but I'm saying it certainly makes me want to understand how we define incitement in a criminal way. When you can see a crime, and you can see the President of the United States has made numerous speeches. You can see clip after clip after clip after clip of him going after, say, for example, Maxine Waters, or of course Hillary Clinton. It goes without saying. The whole lock her up thing that he gets people to chant at the rallies and whatever. Donald Trump has deliberately been stoking, to serve his own interests, fear and resentment towards some of these people on the left. He's been doing so and using lots of language which is at the very least inflammatory, if not outright incitement. The other day, was it last week, I think, when he praised that guy Gianforte in Montana for body slamming a reporter and said, that's my kind of guy. Well, if you're bigging up someone for being violent, and then a few days later, some stupid jerk goes out there and commits acts of violence against the people that you've been complaining about, I don't know, to me kind of seems like incitement, and God only knows. I mean, what's going to happen with the November election is anybody's guess, of course. whether or not Congress flips is almost moot to the point of what I'm about to say, because if this doesn't get Congress to consider putting country before party when it comes to the GOP, if this isn't close to high crime or misdemeanor on the part of the president, I can't really figure out what is, because even after CNN was targeted with one of these pipe bombs, he has still relentlessly kept on talking about how the media is partly to blame for their own problem. And I'm sorry, that is, to say that's not presidential is the most grotesque understatement. It's actually adding fuel to the fire. He's saying, yeah, well, this is what you get when you're fake news, blah, blah, blah. It's like, for fuck's sake, Trump, do you ever stop? Can you stop? Can you be what you need to be, which is obviously a unifier? He tried to say the words, but they are as hollow as they sound coming from Donald Trump, because you can't just go, we need unity right now, we need to bring people together. You can't say that when you spent the past 3 or 4 years going around deliberately stoking divisions. You can't. And on the point of stoking division, our contributor Brock Lawley is about to tell you that he thinks that the solution to these problems is vigorous free speech. And I agree. But I'm going to let Brock give you his thoughts.
What's up, guys? So we discovered that Caesar is the lunatic bomber, or at least that's what we're being told. I'll tell you what millions and millions of Americans are thinking at this moment. Something doesn't pass the smell test. I'm not sure what it is, and I'm not claiming to, but because we live in an establishment heavy statist media society, you just have people just straight up do not believe. And I actually think they're justified in doing that, although I don't have any evidence to point to that would suggest anything differently. It just, something just doesn't pass the smell test. But you gotta think a couple things, right? Timing of this is insane. 10, 11 bombs just don't go off. They find a van with these like neatly, conveniently plastered, decoupaged Trump stickers. I don't know. I mean, who knows? Something that does jump out at you, though, is you got this hyper-partisan environment going on. And this is it's something that all thoughtful people are aware of. And, you got this parade of, you got the senators shooting several months ago, maybe even a year ago now. And now you have this incident, and then you have just crazy amounts of just violence spreading throughout. Just seeing somebody in a MAGA hat and just like punching them or throwing stuff on them in a restaurant. You just have this like very hyper-partisan environment. And a lot of the reason I think that's happening is because we are not discussing ideas, and all we're doing is discussing people's motives. That's pretty much the synopsis of it. I mean, and I think there's a political reason for that. I always look forward to, ache almost, to discuss actual ideas, policy ideas, the things that I believe. I want to do that because I think I'm right. I've thought those things through. I love discussing those things. There's very little appetite for that out there, and particularly from my fellow citizens on the left. If you do not spout the line that you're supposed to spout, whatever the group think Orwellian talking point is, there's just this shutdown and assumption about you as a human being. That's my perspective as a more conservative leaning person. There is no interest in discussing ideas because there's a moralizing and a vilification of the human being. And I think that happens on both sides of the aisle. I really do. I think that is the new normal. That coupled with the fact there's just a blatant and clear war on free speech. You deal with things like this with more speech, more discussion, limitless. Talk about borders, borderless. We should have borderless speech, not borderless nations. Borderless speech. I do not care at all what the speech is. It can be you, me, my neighbor, your neighbor can think it's the most preposterous speech they've ever heard. More of it. More open speech. More limitless, boundless, unrestrained speech. Because I trust people. I trust the people to sift that out and decide from that. I do not trust establishments. I do not trust media litmus tests. I do not trust cultural bullying or silencing. No, more speech will turn into more discussions with real people, which humanizes the people, humanizes them so that you can't compartmentalize them in mind and villainize them and have them worthy of being hit over the head with a bike lock because they don't happen to agree with you. No, more speech and more returning to classically liberal ideas about how to govern a democracy and a republic. That's what we need. That's the recipe for getting out of this. And both political pendulum swings have their culpability, but the enemy of free speech, the enemy of due process, the enemy of the system, I suppose, that has brought us this far is clearly the left. It's clearly, unabashedly the left right now. And for the sake of the nation, I hope they take a brutal and bloodbath-like, pardon the untimely analogy, a bloodbath-like election loss. And the reason I say that is because the left needs to self-correct. They desperately need to self-correct. They're not even offering a political opposition anymore. They're only offering, we hate the other. That's what they're offering. And I imagine the leftist friends of mine listening to that statement and thinking, what are you talking about? You know, because in a leftist mind, you know, somebody who wants borders or somebody who wants, or somebody who doesn't walk around apologizing 24/7 for their white pigment in their skin is the actual one who hates. But it's because there's so many scales over their eyes. We actually need to return, to get out of this labyrinth, we need to return to the things that are true. Free speech is true in a democracy. Speaking to each other, telling each other why we think what we think, and allowing the ideas to win the day is our way out. That's just the truth. Everything else, every other path will end in more violence. Take it easy.
I absolutely agree that there needs to be more dialogue and more rational, calm assessment on both sides of the political spectrum of the other side's gripes, as it were. Having said that, let's not pretend that things are fucking 50-50 here. They're not even close to 50-50, all right? I'm not going to labor myself by digging up loads of videos and showing you like 3 or 4 dozen clips of Donald Trump at his campaign rallies inciting this kind of violence, denigrating the left for being on the left, not for any specific policy, just because they're not us to him. People like me are on the left. We are Democrats, liberals, progressives, whatever he wants to call us, you know, we are the problem in America, according to him. And he keeps on saying it. So Brock, with all due respect, whilst I will absolutely put my hand up and say, yeah, sure, there's divisive voices on the left. Of course there is. Of course there is. But they're not the president of the United States. They don't have that kind of power. They don't have that kind of influence. And it is clear to see that influence is in action. You don't just decide to bomb a dozen people because you had a bad day, right? It's not that kind of crime. This is a well-planned, deliberate act of terrorism. And it is extremely interesting to me I mean, I have seen some news outlets refer to the MAGA bomber as a terrorist and the act of sending these bombs as terrorism. I have seen that. But it interests me that the government doesn't seem to want to use that word. And when Donald Trump did a tweet earlier today, he put the word, talking about these devices that have been sent, he put the word bombs in quotation marks as if bombs was just like, you know, what they're calling these things rather than what they actually fucking are. And I made a joke on Twitter, you know, maybe Donald Trump just thinks they're not really bombs unless they explode. Here's the thing about terrorism. You don't actually have to kill people to create terror. The threat, the possibility, the uncertainty of if, when, or where something else is going to happen, that's where the terror really lies. When the IRA used to have their bombing campaign going on here in the UK, that was the crux of the terror. The crux of the terror was you did not know when it's going to happen again. You just knew it would. Now, if you think this MAGA bomber is the only crazy son of a bitch who's following Trump, who has the means and the technical understanding to do terrorism, you're flat out wrong. It is preposterously unlikely that this is the only guy who's this crazy and desperate. So we got to keep ourselves vigilant. Last but not least, I want to say that I called this like over a year and a half ago. I did say that when the midterm elections come up, you just watch, there will be an act of domestic terrorism. And it's happened. I thought at the time, though, that Trump was going to try to blame the terrorism on some, you know, outside influence, probably Muslims. I thought that was where he was going to go with it. But considering the nature of the targets of this terrorism, that was never going to wash. That was never going to, you were never going to make that pig fly. And now that they've apprehended a suspect who is quite clearly a Donald Trump devotee, I think we need to ask ourselves, can we allow this president to continue in office if this is where we are less than 2 years in? The guy tried to manipulate an election, not Trump, the MAGA bomber. He tried to manipulate an election via intimidation with bombs. With bombs. Okay? The fact that the bombs didn't go off is a happy coincidence. It's lucky. I'm very grateful that no one was injured or hurt in this entire enterprise. But I hope that the fact that no one was killed doesn't mean that the perpetrator, if he's found guilty of these crimes, gets off lightly. I think they need to lock him up and throw away the key. That's what I think. And as for the rest of us, I agree with Brock Lawley. We need to get back to a place where we can have disagreements, you know, as adults across the table and look each other in the eye and still come away thinking, well, you know, maybe we didn't solve anything, but, you know, we don't hate each other. We just disagree. I think that's really important. I think we do need to get back to that. I think it's really encouraging that people who are, you know, with strong sort of right-wing libertarian views like Brock can acknowledge openly that dialogue is important and that the cure for the problems that is caused by free speech is more free speech. I could not agree more. I think that's exactly how we have to handle all difficult situations, really, but especially in times of crisis like this. And let's not try and underplay what's been going on this week. We've had a domestic terrorist try to subvert an election. Now, there are some voices saying, you know, that there might be Russian fingerprints on this and whatever, despite this perpetrator seeming to act on his own. And one of the problems with the Trump presidency is that you just don't know what to believe anymore. You don't know. I would prefer not to jump to those kinds of conclusions without actual hard evidence. That's just me. Nevertheless, you know, these things can take on a life of their own when it gets discussed on social media and in the traditional media as well. So we'll see. But bottom line is, at least they've got the perp. I hope there's nobody else that they haven't got. And I hope no other stupid motherfuckers decide to pick up where this guy left off. All right? There's no place for political violence not in America or anywhere else. You never solve anything with violence. You only push the problem into the future. Real solutions come from dialogue, patience, tolerance, understanding, and a basic acceptance of the fact that we are all stuck here together, and whether we like it or not, we have to get along. So let's try and do that. It's not always going to be comfortable. Sometimes we're going to have to get things we don't want, be made to have things we don't want, or do things that we don't want to do. That's inevitable. But what we should never do is give up our free speech or give up on each other as well. As American citizens, unity seems like a distant dream at this moment, but it's really, really still a possibility. It depends on a collective will to be unified, to see past differences, to look for the common good, the things that we share, and value that stuff more than we value the things that drive us apart. That's what I wanted to say for this video. I look forward to any and all responses in the comment section down below, and I will see you again next week. Thank you, Brock, for your input on this video as well, and I'll see you all again soon. Peace.